The press conference room was filled with flashing cameras and murmuring reporters as Karoline Leavitt and Donald Trump stepped up to the podium. The energy in the room shifted as silence fell, anticipation thick in the air. Karoline Leavitt looked out at the crowd, her voice firm and unwavering as she spoke. She declared that the media had spent too long distorting the truth, hiding real facts, and manipulating public perception. But that era was coming to an end. Donald Trump smirked as he adjusted the microphone, reinforcing Leavitt's statement. He accused the media of pushing a false narrative, twisting reality, and attempting to silence those who stood for America First values. However, he asserted that neither he nor his supporters were going anywhere. Reporters exchanged uneasy glances as they scrambled to take notes, caught off guard by the bold statements. As murmurs grew louder, Trump continued, pointing out how the media had ignored economic failures, rising crime, and the struggles of hardworking Americans. The American people, he claimed, were no longer blind to these deceptions. A reporter in the front row quickly interjected, asking what specific lies he was referring to. Karoline Leavitt leaned in, her tone sharp, accusing the press of pushing an agenda rather than reporting facts. Before the room could erupt into chaos, Trump raised a hand, silencing the crowd. His voice was steady as he made one final declaration. The truth could no longer be hidden, and the people were finally awake to the reality the media had tried to suppress. The room buzzed with tension as reporters shouted over one another, desperate to regain control of the narrative. Some fired off questions in rapid succession, while others exchanged anxious glances, unsure how to counter the bold declarations coming from the podium. Donald Trump smirked, letting the noise die down before leaning into the microphone. You see, this is what they do. They panic when they're confronted with the truth. They don't want to talk about the border crisis. They don't want to talk about inflation crushing American families. They don't want to talk about the corruption happening right in front of our eyes. But guess what? We are going to talk about it. Karoline Leavitt nodded in agreement before addressing the press corps directly. For years, you have smeared conservatives, ignored real issues, and propped up politicians who have failed this country. But the American people aren't buying it anymore. They see what's happening, and they are done being lied to. A reporter in the front row raised his voice. So are you saying the media is the enemy? Trump chuckled, shaking his head. I'm saying the media has a responsibility to tell the truth. But too many of you have abandoned that responsibility in favor of pushing a political agenda. The people are waking up, and that's why your ratings are in the tank. They don't trust you anymore. The room grew even more chaotic as reporters fired back with defensive questions. Some tried to spin the narrative, while others pressed for specifics. But neither Trump nor Leavitt backed down. Leavitt stepped forward again. Here's the bottom line. The days of the media controlling the truth are over. Americans are taking back their voices. They're tired of being silenced, and they're tired of being lied to. And come November, they're going to make that very clear. Listen a little more carefully. With that, Donald Trump turned from the podium, a confident smirk on his face. Karoline Leavitt followed, both ignoring the barrage of shouted questions from desperate reporters scrambling to regain control of the narrative. The scene was chaotic, journalists waving their hands, cameras flashing, the press corps divided between those trying to push back and those sitting in stunned silence, realizing they had just lost control of the story. As Trump and Leavitt made their way off stage, a few voices in the crowd could be heard muttering in frustration. One reporter shook his head, whispering to a colleague, "This wasn't supposed to go like this." Another clenched his jaw, furiously typing, trying to reframe the narrative before it spiraled further. Meanwhile, outside the venue, a crowd of supporters had gathered, watching the event unfold on a large screen. Cheers erupted as they saw Trump and Leavitt walk off with unwavering confidence. Chants of "USA, USA" rang out as the excitement grew. Many held signs reading "America First" and "The Media Lies," The energy was electric. Back in the press room, the journalists tried to regain composure. A network anchor, still, "Live on air," stammered while trying to spin the moment. "Well, that was certainly an unexpected press conference. We'll be analyzing what was said and fact-checking in real time." But no amount of spin could change what had just happened. The message had been delivered loud and clear, and millions of Americans had heard it. In a private area backstage, Trump turned to Leavitt with a grin. "They never learn, do they?" Leavitt smirked. "No, but the American people do." With that, they walked out, knowing the impact of what had just transpired would ripple far beyond the walls of that press room. As they exited the venue, the energy from the crowd outside only grew stronger. Supporters surged forward, eager to shake hands and show their enthusiasm. Chants of "Trump 2024" and "Save America" echoed through the streets. Some held up their phones, live-streaming the moment, while others waved American flags, high above their heads. Trump, always feeding off the energy of his supporters, stopped briefly to greet them. He shook hands, signed hats, and gave his signature thumbs up. "The people know the truth," he said, his voice carrying over the noise. "No matter how much the media tries to spin it, they can't stop what's coming." Karoline Leavitt, standing beside him, smiled as she saw the determination in the crowd. She leaned over to one of the nearby supporters. "They're scared because they know we're winning," she said. "And the best part? This is just the beginning." Meanwhile, inside the press room, the media scrambled to control the damage. Panel discussions were hastily assembled, with political analysts brought on to interpret what had just happened. Headlines flashed across screens. "Trump attacks the press again," and "Leavitt joins Trump in media assault." But for all their efforts, the public wasn't buying it. On social media, clips of the press conference were already going viral. Millions of views poured in within minutes, and hashtags like "Truth over Lies" and "Media Meltdown" trended across platforms. Supporters flooded the comments, celebrating what they saw as a long-overdue reckoning for the media. Back at campaign headquarters, Trump and Leavitt were already strategizing their next move. A senior advisor leaned in. "The press is in full panic mode," he reported. "They're trying to spin it, but the people aren't falling for it." Trump chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Good. Let them panic." Leavitt nodded in agreement. "We're not just fighting back," she said. "We're taking back the narrative." As the night went on, the media continued their desperate attempts to regain control. But the truth had already spread too far. The American people had heard the message loud and clear. And for Trump and Leavitt, this was just the start of a movement they knew couldn't be stopped. The next morning, the political landscape was still reeling from the press conference. Every major news outlet was running stories, each trying to frame the event in their own way. Some called it a reckless attack on journalism, while others admitted, albeit reluctantly, that Trump and Leavitt had struck a nerve with the American people. But despite their attempts to spin the narrative, one thing was clear: the message had landed. Meanwhile, in Trump's campaign headquarters, the energy was electric. Phones rang non-stop with calls from donors, grassroots organizers, and supporters, eager to get involved. The data team confirmed what everyone already suspected. Social media engagement had exploded, surpassing even their most optimistic projections. Trump and Leavitt sat down with their senior advisors, reviewing the impact. One strategist grinned as he held up a report. "We've seen a 200% spike in volunteer sign-ups overnight. The base isn't just energized, they're activated." Trump leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "Good. That's exactly what we want." Leavitt, ever the strategist, tapped her fingers on the table. "We can't slow down now. We have momentum, and we need to keep the pressure on." The team quickly got to work. A new media blitz was launched, showcasing the press conference highlights, alongside footage of struggling Americans. The businesses shuttered under failed policies, the skyrocketing crime rates, the border crisis. The message was clear. The media hides the truth. We expose it. At the same time, preparations for the next rally were underway. The campaign chose a battleground state that had been slipping away from the Democrats, knowing the media would have no choice but to cover it while Trump and Leavitt focused on their next move. Behind the scenes, panic was spreading among their opponents. Democratic strategists scrambled to counter the wave of enthusiasm sweeping across conservative circles. Leaked memos from left-wing political organizations revealed their fears. Trump's messaging was working, and Leavitt's rising influence among younger voters was an unexpected threat. In Washington, top Democratic leaders held an emergency meeting. A senior advisor placed his hands on the table, his voice tense. "They're turning this into a movement. If we don't act fast, we're going to lose control of the narrative for good." A nervous silence filled the room. Finally, a party official spoke up. "We need to," suppressing viral clips from the press conference, while fact-checkers rushed to label key statements as misleading or out of context. It was a familiar playbook: distract, discredit, and distort. But this time, it wasn't working. Trump and Leavitt had anticipated this move. Their team had prepared counter-messaging, pushing back against the attacks in real time. Within minutes of the media's smear campaign, the campaign's rapid response team flooded social media with facts, receipts, and direct rebuttals. Conservative influencers and independent journalists amplified the message, exposing the media's desperate tactics. Meanwhile, on the ground, the movement was only growing. The upcoming rally site had to be moved to a larger venue due to overwhelming demand. Local organizers reported thousands of first-time attendees signing up, many of them disillusioned former Democrats. The enthusiasm was palpable. People weren't just supporting a candidate. They felt they were part of a cause bigger than themselves. The night of the rally arrived, and the energy was unlike anything the media had expected. A massive crowd filled the arena, with thousands more gathered outside watching on big screens. Chants of "USA, USA," and "We love Trump" echoed through the air. American flags waved as speakers fired up the audience. Then the moment came. As Trump and Leavitt took the stage together, the crowd erupted into deafening cheers. Trump grinned, soaking in the moment before stepping to the microphone. "They thought they could silence us," he said, his voice booming over the crowd. "They thought they could bury the truth. But guess what? The American people aren't buying it anymore." The audience roared in agreement. Leavitt stepped forward, her voice strong and unwavering. "For too long, the media and the political elite have lied to you, ignored you, and taken your vote for granted. But that ends now. We are taking this country back." The energy was electrifying. The rally wasn't just a political event. It was a declaration of defiance against the establishment. Watching from their studios, mainstream news anchors looked visibly uncomfortable. Their carefully crafted narratives were crumbling before their eyes. The people weren't listening to them anymore. And in Washington, behind closed doors, Democratic strategists were coming to a grim realization. This movement wasn't stopping. It was only getting stronger. As the rally thundered on, the enthusiasm in the crowd reached a fever pitch. Trump, ever the showman, fed off the energy, pointing to the media section at the back of the arena. "Look at them back there," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "They don't want to show these crowds. They don't want to show what's happening in this country. But guess what? The American people see it, and no amount of fake news can stop it." The crowd erupted in deafening boos directed at the press section, followed by chants of "Tell the truth." The camera crews hesitated, some lowering their equipment, aware that any footage they broadcast would only confirm Trump's claims. Karoline Leavitt took the microphone next, seizing the moment. "They called us extreme. They called us dangerous. But do you know what's actually extreme? Open borders, skyrocketing crime, inflation that's crushing American families. That's what they don't want to talk about, "But we will." The crowd roared in approval. Trump nodded, stepping back to let the cheers die down before delivering his next line. "And in November, we're going to give them the biggest message of all. A message they can't ignore. A message they can't rig. And a message that says loud and clear, we are taking our country back." The arena exploded with applause. People waved signs that read "Trump 2024" and "Save America." Thousands of phone screens lit up as attendees captured the historic moment, broadcasting it live to millions more watching at home. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, political operatives in Washington watched in horror. Back at Democratic headquarters, the mood was grim. A senior strategist, shaking his head, slammed his fist on the table. "This isn't just a campaign, it's a movement. And if we don't find a way to stop it, we're finished." Another aide, scrolling through social media, muttered under his breath, "We tried everything, censorship, smear campaigns, even distractions, and none of it is working. The people just don't believe us anymore." In the White House, late-night meetings were underway. Panic was setting in. Approval ratings for the administration were plummeting, while Trump's numbers were surging. A senior official looked at the latest polling and sighed. "We need a new strategy, because right now, he's winning." Back at the rally, the event was coming to a close, but the message was clear. This was just the beginning. Trump and Leavitt stood together, waving to the cheering crowd, knowing they had struck a nerve that couldn't be ignored. As they exited the stage, a toppy advisor approached them with a knowing look. "They're scared," he said. Trump smirked. "Good. They should be." Leavitt nodded. "Because we're just getting started." And with that, they walked off, ready for the next battle in what was shaping up to be the most consequential fight in American history.